personal opinions do we divulge when our care receivers ask us pointed questions about ourselves or our opinions? And then there's more. It says, when we talked about diverting the question back to them, but we thought this might be a good topic for our leaders.
So this actually is a really good question. And I'm going to answer a little bit of the question with a joke. and the joke is, there's a guy who's in therapy, and he is working with this therapist for years. And as time goes by, he gets increasingly irritated at his therapist because every time he asks his therapist a question, the therapist responds with a question. Well, at one point, he's just had it. He can't take this anymore. He asks his therapist a question, the therapist responds with a question, and the guy flips out. He jumps up out of his seat and he says, "Why is it that you therapists always answer a question with a question?" To which the therapist calmly responds, "Do we?"
Punchline. So I lead with that because there's sort of two parts to the answer. One is that there's a lot of value in being able to respond to questions with questions. This is where our reflective listening comes in, our active listening comes in. There's a reason why the question is being asked. If we're listening carefully, not just to the question, but to the entire context and the entire conversation, there's maybe a question we can respond, or we can ask, that sort of gets at what's underneath the question. Okay, so that's sort of a technique or a tactic for dealing with that kind of issue. The way that question starts is, how much of our stuff should we, or information about ourselves, should we share with our care receiver? To a certain extent, we answered part of that with one of the prior questions, whichever it was, about knowing when to close. So when, as a sign of knowing when it's to close, if you're at a point in the relationship where it seems very comfortable in the relationship, for you to be letting your care receiver know a lot about yourself, it's probably not a Stephen ministry relationship anymore. If you're not at that point, and if the relationship hasn't moved to that point, which of course would be an indication that it's time to close, then it's probably not appropriate to give too much information about yourself, but try to find out what's behind the question. So I kind of joked with Cheryl and earlier that the answer to this question might be, why do you ask? And that would be sort of a wise guy way to answer the question. but the rationale behind that is, why is this person asking that? Is there a trust issue? Is this a situation where the care receiver isn't fully trusting you yet and feels like they need to know more about you? Well, why is that? Let's deal with the trust issue. Or is this simply masking some discomfort that the care receiver is having in being disclosing themselves? So the more we get, the better we are at sort of reflective and active listening, the more we can kind of dig in at where that question is coming from.
Well, one of the things I found too is that it depends on when in the relationship that situation arises. Is it the first visit, first week, or is it the 8th week? 8th week, you're right, is probably they're either you're touching on some real tender areas and they don't want to talk about them, or it's just kind of like, hey, let's have fun and games time. Whereas during the first week, a lot of times it's them sniffing you out. It's kind of reminded of the old Norman Rockwell print of a little boy in the doctor's office about ready to get a shot. He's got his britches down and he's staring at the diploma, trying to read the diploma. The doctor trying to say, who is this dude? Should I really trust him?
You know, I don't think I've ever had a care receiver that didn't ask me pretty quickly about myself. I don't know if it's a female thing or what.
No, it's not gender
We've
specific.
talked about me the whole time. Tell me a little bit about you. You know, that's kind of the way it comes out. So I don't think it's that they're trying to find out if they can trust me. I just, if I'm gonna share my soul with somebody, I kind of want to know something about it.
And we're not professionals. We're lay people. You know, professionals have more boundaries where they don't do that.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're finding common ground, like there may be someone who's asked me in the past who's dealing with breast cancer, have you ever gone through this? And if I can legitimately say, yes, I have, I don't have to tell them any of the details of my experience. That gives a new common ground that we have that the care receiver might not be aware of. So it's okay to, I think, to share, things like that.
Yeah, I would not disagree. I would not disagree with that.
I wouldn't
think there's a
volunteer it.
limit, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a limit to that.
Right.
You
And
answer briefly and then you move on,
then move on. Yeah.
which is, I'm sure, what you do.
Al?
It seems to me that it's not the same, but very similar to a successful salesperson gets somebody to do something, and it's their idea, not the salesperson's idea, the customer's idea.
Right.
And that's what you have to do with them, is bring them so that they can decide for themselves, yes, I need to do this.
I mean, anybody who's been in sales has that technique when they deal with it.
Probably.
Yeah.
Now, what it requires is for you to be very knowledgeable. So the more knowledgeable we are about Stephen ministry, the better we can do to get that point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to Susan's point, remember that the point is that we're there to discuss what's going on with the care receiver. And there are certain things about our experiences, there are certain things about our qualifications, there are certain things that we bring to the conversation that are pertinent to the conversation and relevant. And we need to make that, to make that judgment call. I mean, we do give our care receiver certain standard information. For instance, about maybe the training that we've gone through with student ministry, how long we've been a student minister, supervision groups, those sorts of things. Those kinds of things are pertinent, and certain experiential things are pertinent as well. I don't think there's a problem with that.
I mean, I've met a few of my care receivers in my scrubs because it's just that time of day that I'm in my scrubs. And they'll be like, oh, you're a nurse. And I'm like, yes. And who do you work for? And I'll share that information. This is, part of it. So, and so then they know that I'm a nurse. And every once in a while things come up and so I watch my boundaries carefully with that, but I'm also honest. I mean, that's who I am, and it's okay. It's okay.
Skip.
I want to go back to something John said a few minutes ago. I don't know about you all, but before I get into a swimming pool or water, I usually put my toe in before I dive in. And sometimes people may be asking questions to test the waters before they dive in with their issue.
The trust issue.
And I think of examples where I've had people who 3 or 4 times in a row, they would just start talking about other stuff. And I'm thinking, like you were asking, John, what are they tiptoeing around?
Right.
And eventually they finally trust enough to dive in, like you were saying, Scott. So be aware that it could be that they're not trying to come to an end or the end of the relationship. They just may be trying to get the guts to say something they really want to spill.
And I think too, Cheryl, you're matching, because there's a, something in common, there's something.
Hopefully.
So that's easier, and you share it with the student ministers, about that. So that's oftentimes, you can go and just say, I've been where, I can relate to that, or just at the beginning, an icebreaker, kind of just, and I think we do that. I mean, I do that, and just and more than one, and more than the initial time. I might, different circumstances, different care receivers, but.
Why would you share with somebody if they're not willing to be open?
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think though that we want to never put ourselves in a position where we're suggesting that we have the answers. And sometimes when our care receivers are asking us fairly pointed questions, they're also trying to figure out if we've got the answers for them. And it's important that we let them know, or that we be humble enough to understand we don't have the answers.
I think too, to focus on the fact that this is a process-oriented, that you have process-oriented goals versus, help me, versus results-oriented. So we're gonna get a result. I'm gonna, this is homework time, right? So process-oriented goals are really important. If you can keep that in your head, that this is going, these are my process-oriented goals versus I'm gonna see a result. This is what I expect. This is what we're gonna do today. Be careful of that because you can get into that really easy.